Hello, my name is Mark O'Keefe. I'm executive editor of Herald-Standard.com. Welcome to this Herald-Standard.com editorial board meeting with candidates for the 49th Legislative District, which includes parts of Fayette and Washington counties. The candidates are Democratic incumbent Pete Daley and his Republican challenger Richard Massafra. And we thank them both for agreeing to meet with us today. Editorial board members present today are courthouse reporter Jennifer Harr, managing editor for content Terry Sneed, and community member Bill Long. The candidates will get 3 minutes for opening and closing statements and 3 minutes to answer questions from members of the editorial board. So we'll start with the opening. We'll go alphabetical order. Mr. Daley.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be before the board again and be able to debate the issues at hand regarding the 49th Legislative District, Southwestern Pennsylvania. I've had the absolute delight and pleasure to represent the 49th District for the past 30 years in the House of Representatives, and I serve as chairman of the House Commerce Committee on the Democrat side. This is a really distinct campaign. It's against Pete Daley, who has worked for the district for 49th District for many years, and my opponent that appears to be a clone part of the Republican administration from me reading all his campaign material. I read his website and I found out that I was running against a guy that fundamentally wants to abolish the 16th and 17th Amendment to the Constitution. And we, the legislature, as you know, really don't deal with the 16th and 17th Amendment until we ratify the same. Those are the direct election of the senators and also the income tax. Now, I don't know that we actually deal with that very much in the legislature. For the past 30 years, that hasn't been an issue in front of us. We're dealing with an economy in Pennsylvania, like the rest of the nation, that's been very sluggish. And we in southwestern Pennsylvania, especially here in Fayette County, in which I had 5 poverty summits, we've been discussing this matter for a long time. We have an economy over $350 billion, billion dollars. And we're 17th largest economy in the world. Now, I think there's a distinct difference between myself and my opponent, who says he's a small business person. Now, I'd like to know exactly what kind of small business person he was and what he's done and what kind of qualifications he has, but that's going to be up to the voters, and it's going to be up to you to decide exactly that. I'm going to be able to pro-offer various things we've done over the last several years. I'm going to talk about my record. I'm going to talk about a record of accomplishment. We're going to talk about many issues, and I can't wait to answer the questions that are going to be afforded to me by the editorial board, and I'm looking forward to that debate.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Massafra.
All right, I'm Rich Massafra, obviously, and some people always ask, who am I? And, well, I'm a father of 2, I've been a grandfather of 3, and I've been married for 32 years. I'm a systems engineer right now, and I've been a manufacturing engineer before that. And I have a BS degree in manufacturing technology from California University. And they also ask why I'm running, and I'm running because of my opponent Pete's horrible record in the Valley and in this 49th District. As you can see, we've had a declining population, we've had job loss. Some of these towns in this district have lost 50% over the last 30 years, and we're moving toward ghost towns. And I would like to rectify that, and I think I have a good plan to help bring jobs back to this area, and help to, and I also have good plans to help improve the education system, and that's why I'm running against Pete, because of his destruction of this good economy that we've had, and we'll just debate the issues as they come up.
Okay, thank you very much. You want to take the first question, Terry?
Sure. What's your opinion of the new voter ID law? Do you think the state is doing enough to make sure that voters have the proper identification to vote? And you might want to answer, too, what you think of the judge's ruling, which temporarily delayed, having to actually present your ID in order to vote. It will be requested of you, but you will be able to vote anyway.
Start with me. All right. I think it's a good law, and the opinion was okay with me to delay that any time that we can cut down on some potential voter fraud or whatever is a good idea, to make sure everybody gets one vote and make sure that vote counts. And I think the implementation was pretty good. Probably not a perfect bill, but you can have school ID, you can have government ID, you can have driver's license, you can have ID from the care home that you're in. I mean, they offer a lot of potential to get an ID, and now with this extra year, I think everybody should be able to comply with that. And plus, they also gave you a year to, if it expired, you also had a year for your driver's license. So I think they've made a lot of provisions and made it as easy as possible to get to that point of having a valid ID whenever you vote. So I'm in favor of it.
So you are in favor of the judge's ruling that delayed it, or you're in favor of the bill in general, or you're in favor of both?
I'm in favor of both.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do you think that the injunction should be made permanent, or do you think that
I think they give another year. I think that should be sufficient time to get your all the identification that you need.
Okay, thank you very much.
It would be a total of 2 years, so I think that would be good.
Okay. Pete?
Well, I'm amazed by the answer by my opponent. This is a bad law. It was rammed down the throats of the legislature. This was strictly done by the Republicans. Mike Terzai, the guy that's financing his campaign and putting out all these mailers and putting all this propaganda on the street. It's a bad bill. You don't pass a bill when there's no problem. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we have had not one voter fraud case in Pennsylvania in 7 years. Let me say that. 7 years, not one voter fraud case. And all of a sudden, Mr. Terzai stands up at the Republican State Committee and says, we passed the voter ID bill in the legislature to ensure that Obama loses the election. Now, if that was the motivation, no one said that on the floor, and if that's a good bill, I think that's un-American. That's wrong. I opposed the bill. I voted against the bill. Judge Simpson didn't get it right the first time. When it came back from the Supreme Court, Judge Simpson had no other choice but to delay this bill. People are given IDs when you register to vote. We didn't have any problem. This was geared to cutting out minorities, blacks, seniors that don't have access to driver's license. And that's how the whole thing started. It's a bad bill. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we didn't need it fixed. It was just, and as Mike Terzai finally said publicly at the Republican State Committee, we did it so Obama would lose Pennsylvania. And that's baloney. That should never be law.
And do you think the injunction should be permanent?
I absolutely do. And I'd like to join it as an amicus brief to the court to make it permanent. It's wrong. Judge Simpson, I was amazed. I know Judge Simpson, he's a great jurist, and he had to do it that way. He said, listen, you have any kind of ID, you come, you can vote. That's the way it should be. We got to get more people to vote, not less people to vote.
Okay, I'll take the next question. It's kind of several questions in here. The Turnpike Commission is reportedly $7 billion in debt, with much of their revenue going to help pay for PennDOT's transportation costs. There is concern over whether the Turnpike Commission could default on the bonds. Do you share that concern, and how do you think the Turnpike Commission should get out of debt? Furthermore, do you think more revenue is needed to pay for the state's transportation needs, and how do you think it should be raised? And finally, are you in favor of the Turnpike Commission raising its tolls by 3% each year till 2050 as the plan is now? Pete?
Well, you followed the stories. I called for the resignation of Mr. Nutt and Mr. Chewy. Wagner, the Auditor General, came out in January of this year saying that we have a $7.3 billion deficit in the Turnpike, and something has to be done, or guess what? It's going to explode. Did I say 7.3 billion? When we passed Act 44 at the behest of the Turnpike Commission, Governor Rendell, and also PennDOT, we set aside in Act 44 monies to go to PennDOT for the Highway and Bridge Project. That has totaled approximately $250 million a year since 2008. Now, the Turnpike Commission, when I direct my inquiry to Mr. Nutt, they indicated to me there's no problem. Now, I don't understand that. When we go, the states, our debt is $2.3 billion. They got a $7.3 billion deficit. They're saying there's no problem, and I questioned that. I said, that doesn't make sense to me. They're saying, well, it's because of Act 44. Well, Act 44 took about $2.5 billion and added to the deficit. At the time we passed Act 44, it was about $2.3 billion. So the Turnpike went out and spent another $3 billion since we passed it on expanding the road, building new toll plazas, building new service plazas. Okay, now the U.S. Attorney General's office has a grand jury investigating the Turnpike. That's a good thing. We've heard it was pay and play, pay as you go. The nepotism, the cronyism, the Turnpike needs to be dissolved. It needs to be rolled back into the legislature where the governor has oversight over the Turnpike Commission. Number one. Number two is not resigned yesterday. I don't know if you read that in the paper. Not has resigned. He said due to health reasons. I think it's due to the health reasons of the Turnpike Commission. When he sat at the Transportation Committee and between the House and the Senate, I sat there and they didn't want me to ask any questions, but I passed questions out to all the members so they could ask the questions. I was not allowed to participate. They asked him point blank after Jack Wagner just said it's going to explode, it's going to blow up. What are we going to do about this? This is a major crisis we're facing. Mr. Nutt said we don't have a crisis, and everybody sat there and says like, okay, we don't have a crisis. How are you going to
30 seconds?
How are you going to resolve it? He said number one, we're going to lay off the toll takers. We're going to implement an automated system, and we're going to raise tolls. Someone says, is there a tipping point for the tolls? He said no. What that means is they're going to continue to raise the tolls. Well, guess what? That's baloney. I mean, you drive on the Turnpike across the state, it's like almost $30. He didn't get it. Those are bad answers. That didn't make sense. And we do need to carve out a way of doing this, and it has to be done in a more succinct way by the House, the Senate, the Governor, the Turnpike Commission, and the Department of Transportation, because we have billions of dollars of bridges and highways are falling apart, and we can't do it on the back of the Turnpike Commission. We can't.
What about the people that say that, kind of blaming the Turnpike Commission for this problem when it was the state legislature that more or less put them into the position? And should there have been some action taken? I mean, the whole reason why Act 44 was passed was because we thought that I-80 was going to be told. And once I-80 wasn't told, shouldn't the legislature have taken some action to either change Act 44 or do something different?
Well, I agree, and I've called for the repeal of Act 44 in order to get that $300 to $400 million out of that Turnpike Commission budget. But here's what happened. When the Turnpike Commission came to the legislature, and with the governor coming to the legislature, they said, here's the plan. We're going to pass this, we're going to roll this in, and like you said, we were going to toll Interstate 80. Well, guess what? That didn't happen. The legislature should have immediately repealed the bill. The governor at that time was Rendell. He should have repealed the bill because all of a sudden $400 million was coming out of the Turnpike Commission and going into PennDOT. But when Rendell leaves office, Governor Corbett gets in, he should have repealed the bill. He should have called for the repeal. The legislature was controlled by the Republicans, House and Senate. And what happened is it's taken $400 million out of the budget that would normally come out of our budget, and it's being supplemented by the Turnpike. They don't want to repeal this because that money's been made up by the Turnpike. When you have a $3.2 billion deficit, adding on another $300 or $400 million for PennDOT, that would make the deficit even more. So there's not been an interest on behalf of the governor or the administration or the Republican-controlled House and Senate to do that. It has to be done. And now it's started to pick up steam since we heard what Mr. Nutt said about laying it on the backs of the people that run on the Turnpike. That's ludicrous.
What do you think should happen?
I think it does. I think we have to repeal.
But obviously there has to be a way to try and make up these revenues. How do you think it should be made up?
And we're talking about that right now. And that's why I called for that there be a special commission between the Turnpike, the Department of Transportation, the governor's office, and the legislature to sit down and try to resolve this issue in a more logical way. Because one way or another, either the Turnpike Commission is going to explode and we're going to have that completely dissolved because we're going to lose our bond rating. It's very close to it. I talked to people in New York on Wall Street about this. I believe that they're going to have to look at other ways of funding PennDOT, either for users' fees or other ways, but it just cannot continue to go the way it is with all our dilapidated bridges and highways.
in favor of gas tax?
I've supported gas tax in the past, which is a user tax. People that use the roads, use gas, that's a usury tax. Yeah, I've supported that in the past. But right now, with the price of gas, I don't think I'd support that because I think it places too big of a burden on the taxpayers. That's why we have to look at all the issues involved. Fees, other ways of funding that. But taxpayers don't want any tax increases.
Okay.
Well, first of all, my opponent over there, he's always in the blame game of somebody, and he's blamed the governor, previous governor, and this governor whenever he voted for it, and yet he's the head of he was the head of the Commerce Committee at one time, which means you would think that he would know something about business, and the Turnpike is nothing but a business, and how can you vote for a bill that takes money away, $450 million a year, away from business that doesn't make $450 million, and they have to go borrow it? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, that is just third grade math would tell you that they would be in trouble, and yet he voted for it. So I just I think Act 44 is a bad deal, and that we should repeal that. And how do you make up that money? It obviously has to be paid, and there's going to have to be a combination of things that get done, whether it's through some toll hikes and some other fees or whatever. Sure, it's going to have to be paid back. And my opponent has always been the tax and spend and borrow one, and there is more borrowing, and it always gets you in trouble whenever you borrow that much money. So I just think that we have to quit borrowing money in this Commonwealth, because we're about $10,000 per person in debt, and that's a heavy burden for everybody here.
Do you have any ideas specifically how this money could be raised to replace this money?
Not right this time.
What about the gas tax?
I don't know. Gas is pretty high. I don't know if people would go for that. We'd have to take a look and see what else there is. There's obviously, there's going to be some toll hikes to pay for it, and probably some other stuff. But I'm not sure what those would be.
Do you have any concern about the increasing the tolls on the Turnpike? Do you see a tipping point, or?
I think so. Yeah, people aren't going to use it when it gets too expensive. Absolutely, people find a different way, and 3% a year is a lot of money over those 15 years or 20 years or whatever. Absolutely.
Okay. Bill, do you want to take the third question?
Certainly. This would be for Mr. Massafra. Do you think more or less regulations are needed for the Marcellus Shale? Do you think the state's DEP has done a good job of regulating the industry so far? And what's your opinion on the tax on Marcellus Shale? Is it too much or too little?
Regulations. I think we should have some adequate regulations, and that was started back a while ago, and that we've changed and will need to change. Obviously, things aren't implemented perfectly the first time, and I think we have to. There's enough money in Marcellus Shale that we can fix up whatever is broken, but I don't think we should stop at this point. And the fee, I think, is pretty reasonable, considering all the other taxes that they have to pay. I think they're burdened with other taxes and that fee, so I think that is very reasonable. And my opponent, Pete Daley, I don't think he voted for that, even though he was on the floor, and it would have helped cities and towns and counties. And just want to say that I think it's pretty good.
Do you think that overall DEP is doing a good job of regulating the Marcellus Shale?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, I've heard stories, good and bad alike, and they've had the studies that come out, and I just think they've done a good job, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Pete?
Well, spoken like a true Republican. First minutes, I didn't understand where he was standing on the issue, kind of spinning through the process, but it came down to the fact that I was on the floor and I did vote, and I was locked out because they actually voted up and locked out several people besides me. But I think that he talks like the governor. The governor, for 2 years, held back any regulation on the Marcellus shell industry. Any regulation, because they made all the contributions to his party. And as a matter of fact, to his governor. And the governor had a philosophy, we're not touching it. And the people of Pennsylvania suffered. We lost the tax money that we could have derived from that because this governor, his administration, the Republicans decided in the House and the Senate they weren't going to move anything. They finally moved a bill that was half-cocked. It's a bad bill. It really doesn't resolve the issue. It doesn't deal with, we're the only state that doesn't regulate them the way other states do. Some states have local preemption. Local preemption. And they've taken that away from, he said this is good for the municipalities. I don't know what bill he read, but the one was passed is bad for municipalities because really the exemption's out of there. That local exemption's out of there, the state runs the bill. And it's a problem. The Marcellus industry could be a multi-billion-dollar industry for Pennsylvania. But they didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to deal with it because they donated to all these Republican people running for governor. And, that's a shame when you place your party above the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And that's what's happened here. Now, the DEP regulated properly? No, they're not. They cut DEP's permitting budget. We have 1,000 applications in Fayette County for wells. And they can't even get through like the first a couple hundred of them. I think that this is going to come back to bite the buttocks of Pennsylvania because what we've done here, I think that we could have extracted a lot of money when we had a $3.5 billion deficit last time, and they wouldn't even pass the legislation. They wouldn't even deal with the legislation. They didn't want to consider it. We could have saved the taxpayers, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. They didn't do that. We passed a bill that's half-cocked. It needs to be revisited. One of these days, when we get a legislature that's run by people that really have common sense and what's best for the taxpayer,
30 seconds.
They'll pass legislation that's the best for the taxpayers, not for the people who contribute to the people running for office.
Okay, thank you very much. Jen, you want to take the fourth question there?
Sure, this is for you. The state recently released its PSSA test scores, and many of the districts in Fayette, Greene, and Washington counties failed to make adequately yearly progress. What do you think the reason is behind the low test scores, and do you fault Governor Corbett for his education cutbacks, or do you place the blame more on the local school districts?
Well, Governor Corbett has been hell-bent on a mission to destroy public education for the last 2 years. He got $1 billion out of their budget. We in Fayette County, we in Washington County, aren't like places in mainline Philadelphia where they have tremendous tax bases to draw from. My opponent wants to have vouchers. He calls it opportunity grants. That's destroying public education. Charter schools are destroying public education. That money for charter schools comes from local school districts like Brownsville. I have a school district, and you all know this, Connellsville. One of the schools have 100% of the kids on reduced and subsidized lunches. We have this unfair balance, this table that doesn't work. Western Pennsylvania schools like Best Center, Brownsville, Connellsville, Uniontown, Washington, we have declining tax base. We have declining number of people that kids can really afford to go to school. Now, and if you take away millions of dollars and billions of dollars from the budget, all those school districts and his governor cut Mount Lebanon by zero. Nothing. If you looked at the formula, nothing. You look at what they did to Brownsville. $500,000 was cut from their budget. Same thing, I think, for Uniontown. You can't do that. We lost 14,000 teachers because of the philosophy of cutting public education. 14,000 teachers in Pennsylvania. When you don't have the teachers, when you don't have the money, you have a school district that can't buy books, how are they going to compete on a test it's tested on a statewide basis? I taught school. I taught 8th grade. I understand education. You can't cut funding and expect kids to get an equal education like they do in Mount Lebanon or Upper St. Clair. Our kids are at a marked disadvantage. And there's this philosophy, the philosophy of my opponent, is to keep cutting. He actually wants to eliminate public schools. What the heck's that all about? I think it's appalling that this has happened. It just goes to show you can't cut. You can't cut the budgets where you cut the teachers, where you cut the programs. You can't throw money at the problem either. That won't fix it. And I think the PSSA scores, the test scores, are abysmal, and it's really an epitaph to what's going on in Harrisburg for the last 2 years.
Okay, thank you very much.
First off, you're the one that endorsed Governor Corbett whenever he was running.
What's that mean?
You
Of course I endorsed Governor Corbett. I endorsed
You
endorsed
could
Yeah, I did. I absolutely did.
Whoa, wait a minute.
So
wait a
what's
minute.
that
Wait a
about
minute.
this particular issue?
Wait a minute. I didn't talk while you was
That's
talking.
absolutely
So,
right.
okay, so listen up. Listen up. You
Listen
have
up.
time. Listen. You have time
You
later.
have your time.
You have
That's
time
right.
later.
Oh, I
You're
believe
a
it.
long-winded guy. I'm sure you'll get your time in.
You're not.
Okay, so listen, you're the one that endorsed Governor Corbett. You had somebody else that you could have endorsed, but you didn't. You chose to endorse Governor Corbett, and you knew what he was about whenever you endorsed him. So either you were lying that you wanted to endorse him, or you're just doing it for political advantage, one or the other. I don't know what it was, but you endorsed him. Okay, so that's first off. So you can't keep saying it's my governor, because it's your governor too, because you're the one that endorsed him. Absolutely. All right. And I don't want to eliminate public education. I want to give people, so whenever schools are failing, here's the thing, whenever schools are failing, a student, they need the options to be able to go and get the best education for them. If they go to the best school in the world, and one guy, one person, one woman, one guy, whatever it is failing, they need to be able to fix that. The parents need to be able to put them in a school that works for them. And that's all I'm trying to get to. You want to put unions above children in education. I want to put children first in education, because you're always, whenever you voted for the budgets of Rendell, they all increased public school funding. And they increased it, and we've had a declining population and increasing teacher numbers over the years. We've had in 10 years we've had 35,000 more teachers and personnel in schools and 35,000 less students. So you can't tell me that we haven't tried that. And the thing is that we spend in Brownsville, we spend $12,000 a year per kid. That's about $240,000 to $300,000, depending on how many children in a classroom per year on education. So my question is always, where is the money going to? $300,000 per classroom is a lot of money whenever you have 25 kids in there. I don't think throwing money at it is the right solution. I think we need to figure out where the money's going and how we can spend it better.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
Okay, Terry, you want to take the next question?
Sure. There have been various proposals over the years to replace or reduce property taxes with an increase in the sales tax or adding more items which can be taxed. Overall, do you think that property taxes are too high? And if so, what do you think could be done to try and lower that?
Rich.
I think property taxes are too high, especially, when we look at the composition of this district. We have a lot of people on fixed incomes, and a lot of them are lower incomes. And just like Pete was saying, we've had declining population, we've had declining incomes. We're about 30 to 40% lower than the median household income compared to Pennsylvania. And I blame some of that on Pete's policies. He's been there for 30 years. And it hasn't gotten any better. It's been on a downhill decline for the last 30 years. And we have to change the policies. We have to build up that tax base like Eastern Pennsylvania does, and we can do that with some good policies. And we can start to drop some of those property taxes. And if it's up to me, I would try to find a way to eliminate them, because it's your house, and you shouldn't have to pay the government to live in your house. It's a moral issue to me, and that's what I'd like to see.
There have been some talk about that. I believe it was bill number 1776, where they were looking at it and did get some bipartisan support, but it fell, I think, $1 million or something short of actually the amount that would be needed to run the schools. Do you have any thoughts about that, and particularly in terms of if you're going to the sales tax, do you think it should be raised, or do you think it should be expanded to try and make up that revenue?
You can't raise it too much, because then people start shopping in other places, and there's always that competition going along, especially people along the border states or whatever, they're close to states that border us. So you could raise it some, but maybe expand it a little bit. I haven't really studied it that much. I haven't been in the legislature for 30 years to come up with a problem. I haven't come up with a solution for that problem. And I just think it just needs study. There's a lot of people that have been out there studying it, and they put forward some propositions that we should look at and see if they would work or not.
Okay, thanks very much. Pete?
Well, my opponent wants you to believe that I actually controlled the national economy, the state economy for the last 30 years, and I, as one of 253 members of the legislature, and if he should have the opportunity to win, can go to Harrisburg and wave a magic wand and make people just like do what I want them to do. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way, sir. We work, Republican, Democrats, everybody work together. And he's saying that I voted for all this tax increases. Well, guess what? The last 2 years, I voted against your governor's budget. I'm not a tax and spend Democrat, but your governor's a slash and burn Republican. And when you slash and burn, you got to come up with some other ways of figuring out how to fund these things. And guess what? You know what happened with your administration, what you guys have done in Harrisburg, the budget we voted against that screwed the school districts. All the school districts now, it's shifted downhill, have to raise taxes on the taxpayers on property tax. Property tax is a bad way of getting money. It should be done in a more discreet way, in a more earned income tax way. We had a bill in 1996, Governor Casey put on the referendum, and his party and the business, it was the Chamber of Commerce and the Manufacturers Association went out and lobbied against that bill. That bill would have set up an earned income tax plan and eliminate property tax in Pennsylvania. It lost 70 to 30. I mean, remarkably lost. But the question I have is that if we eliminate property tax, which everyone says, how do we do it in Pennsylvania? When our Constitution says it is a uniformity clause. And that's the biggest problem we have. It has to be uniform. If you eliminate property taxes on residential property, you eliminate property taxes on businesses. And that's where the problem's been. How do we do that? We need to address a constitutional issue. We need to change the Constitution and separate the uniformity clause. We need to lower property tax or eliminate property taxes on homeowners because, number one, in our district, right here in Fayette County and throughout Fayette County, I have people today that 51% of my kids are in poverty. 52% of my seniors are in poverty. And these people are the same people who are paying taxes for kids to go to school, Brownsville School District, Collinsville School District, Uniontown School District. Oh my God. They're making a decision right now to either heat their home, eat, or pay taxes. And that's why I stepped up to the plate and I sponsored the PACE program, and which is the pharmaceutical assistance copay for the elderly. By the way, over the last 30 years, we did pass some good things. And that was one of the bills I debated on the floor.
30 seconds.
Was a good bill. Also, the rent and property tax rebate for seniors. I led the debate on the floor to get that passed over this span of time. So I wasn't just sitting on my hands being a tax and spend Democrat. We need to eliminate property tax. People want it and people deserve it.
Pete, do you regret that more of the casino proceeds haven't been earmarked for property taxes as intended?
Yeah, and that was so manipulated, and we've talked about that in the past, I think, that the casinos had the fingers so much around that legislation that they worked it out so a percentage would come back to the municipalities under that local share program. Washington County has done well, $13 million a year. Now if we get Nemacolin and Woodlands, I think we'll probably get $6 or $7 million coming back to Fayette County on that. That was just taken out of the legislation. And it was taken out of the legislation in the Senate, which was controlled by the Republicans. That should have never happened. The whole concept of bringing gambling into Pennsylvania, expanding gambling into Pennsylvania, was to get rid of property tax. That just never happened.
Let me just say, whenever the casinos were first mentioned, it was supposed to pay for property taxes, and then it was roads and bridges. And it was sold on so many different avenues that there was no way that it was going to pay for everything that they promised. I knew it was a farce from the beginning, and it wasn't going to do what it said. I mean, if you just paid attention to it, they promised you everything to get it passed, and it finally got passed, and now here it is. We don't have property tax reduction. We don't have better roads and bridges, and we don't have whatever else they promised. They promised everything, like it was going to be the do all and be all and end all of our problems. So
thanks to the Republican Senate for making sure that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Check the record.
And you know
It's
what? Check
Okay.
check the record of you and Rendell's and all the tax increases and all the spending increases that you have done and all the borrowing over the 10 years. We went from paying $341 million to $1.1 billion in interest and debt payment in 10 years, and you voted for every one of those budgets to increase the spending and the borrowing and the payment back.
And guess what? The
Absolutely.
Republican-controlled
Okay,
Senate.
we're going to move on.
Absolutely.
We're going to move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
right.
enough.
Okay.
We're going to move on to the next question, Bill.
Well, you should have let him
Hey,
just do that. I mean, really, seriously.
we're moving on.
You get a lot of
We're moving on,
questions.
gentlemen.
Believe me, you will too. Because
Bill,
you said
take the
it,
next
did it.
question.
Thank you. It's quite timely. There's been talk about reducing the number of legislators as a way of reducing expenses for state government. What's your position on this issue, and what is your position on term limits for state legislators?
Okay, number one is, I think it's my turn.
Yes.
Yeah, since 1994, I introduced legislation to create a unicameral legislature. It went from 17 to 15 to 12 to 11 co-sponsors. I continued to do that for several years. All of a sudden, now we want to have legislative reform. I'm for it. I am a co-sponsor of the unicameral legislature. I'm a co-sponsor of cutting the size of the legislature. I'm the guy that got the bill passed. My amendment was to cut down the legislature and reform that when we're not into session after 11 o'clock at night, so that we can't do things under the veil of darkness and to be done in the open. I am totally for term limitation. If that's the will of the legislature and the people, the way this works is we pass the bill, we send it to the Senate, they pass the bill, it goes to the constituents for a referendum vote. But you know what? If this gentleman wins or I win, we have 2-year terms, and every year we're running, and it's up to the taxpayers for us. Every 2 years, it's like term limitation because they can vote you in or vote you out. Senate, 4 years, different story. They got a long time to forget from what happened in year 1 to year 4. So we kind of, in essence, have term limitations for the House. That's every 2 years, you're right back. Every year, you're right back before the people. But I'm for reform. I've been out there on this issue a long time ago.
Do you have any specific numbers as to what you would like to both the House and the Senate cut to?
Well, my proposal was initially to do 125 members of a unicameral legislature. It's very similar to Nebraska. There's no reason why we need 2 chambers of government. There's no reason why we need a House of Lords to oversee the House of Commons. The checks and balances within the legislature doesn't need to be there. We duplicative on everything. Education, transportation. All those committees are duplicated. We pass a bill, we send it over there, and they do the same thing. It just doesn't make sense. I think it should be 125 members of a unicameral legislature. Pennsylvania had the first General Assembly in the United States since the 1600s, one chamber. They're talking about cutting the legislature down to now 125, the House, and cutting the Senate down to 35. I'm for that too. I mean, anything that can make the system work better, because it doesn't work. It does not work because we have this duplicative services.
And what about term limits? Any specific numbers
I tell you
there?
what, I've talked to people that have term limits in Florida, and in Florida they have 12 or 10 years. And, you know, I've heard good and bad, because what happens with term limits, the downside of term limits is this. What happens is government is run by the administrators and the bureaucrats. They're the ones that really understand what's going on. Because if you're in the legislature, it's going to take you, the learning curve is there's no one's going to walk in there day one and know how to run the bill. Do the bills, do all that. It takes years to understand just even where the bathrooms are. But then all of a sudden you have to like yield yourself to the bureaucrats. And that's a problem. I think we lose a lot of contact with people running the government as opposed to people being elected running the government as opposed to the bureaucrats.
But overall, you do favor term limits.
I think it's time that we do that.
But you don't have, do you think 10 years?
I
then is, or do
think
you
10
it
to
should be
12
more?
years would be fine. I mean, I know that's spoken from a guy that's been there 30 years, but I've seen it. I mean, I've watched how it works, and it's going to take a while to learn. If this gentleman, it's going to take him 6-8 years to learn how it works the deal. And to become a chairman and to do those things that's necessary for your constituency, it takes a while to learn it. And I think that if we do term limits, I think they should be about 12 years.
Okay. Okay. Rick?
Well, I think if he's really in favor of term limits, he would have term limited himself out after maybe 24 years or 30 years, whatever. But obviously he hasn't, so I'm not sure how much of that I can believe. 30 years going for 32. Yeah, I believe in term limits as long as it's not for me, I guess. And then obviously you were in favor of the midnight pay raise, and then you said, okay, we can't make legislation after midnight. So, you are just amazing. You just keep spewing them out. It's just amazing at the pace that you can do that. And obviously you don't care about cutting the cost of the legislature, because your number, what is it, 5 in per diems? You took $24,000 last year. You're in the top 10. You're always in the top 10. So you maybe had about $300,000 or $400,000 over 30 years in per diem. So you got your expenses, and then you got the unvouchered expenses on top of the expenses they already paid for. So I'm not sure how you can be in favor of cutting expenses. And to come back to cutting the size of the legislature, I think it's a red herring, because a guy like me that doesn't have a lot of money could not run and almost beat him last time without hardly any money. And now to come back and do it again, I mean, the bigger the district is, the harder it is. It would just be like the Incumbent Protection Act if you would cut it down. There are ways to cut down on the expenses and not the size. And I'm okay with the Senate being 50 and the right where it's at. And I work with people where I work at now. I work with people from around the nation, and we are all on the same team. We never get in the same office, but we still accomplish things. And I don't see why you have to go to Harrisburg all the time to make laws when you can be doing it from your own home office. You won't need travel expenses or per diems. And there are just so many ways and technologies out there that reduce cost that we can use that to reduce the cost.
What do you think about staffing? Do you think that could be a way to reduce costs too?
I'm not sure how much staff you get, but I mean there should be a limit on that. Absolutely. I haven't gotten to that point yet. When I win on November 6th, I'll think about staff.
Okay, Jen, you want to take this will be the final question.
Sure, Rich, this is for you. Groups such as volunteer fire departments are upset over the upcoming changes in the small games of chance law, which basically puts the burden of reporting winnings on the groups selling the chances. They're claiming the laws are too detailed and will result in them earning less money and possibly jeopardizing their existence. What do you think of those claims, and are you worried about groups like the volunteer fire departments going out of business because of the changes?
In our district, there are consolidation among fire departments already, and they're hard hit by the economic times. And I think whoever passed that bill is kind of crazy. It was the most stupid bill I ever heard of. I was out talking to two brothers. I was out campaigning the other day, and they were telling me about how burdensome it is, and I couldn't believe that somebody would actually pass a bill like that. And it just it needs to be repealed, and they need to go back to the way it was, absolutely, because they're gonna start to lose money, and it's going to hurt their operations. I mean, fire trucks are a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they need to raise it because they're volunteers, and they don't, they obviously don't have a tax base that they can go to. So we need to support our volunteer fire department with less regulations like that. Absolutely.
Although the state is saying that a lot of these bills, even a lot of the restrictions, regulations, were actually in the original bill that was passed back in 1988, and it just kind of had never been enforced. What type of, can you say, like what type of regulations maybe you think are needed and aren't needed, or
I mean, they would, they have bingos and small games of chance and that, and they need to be able to give somebody some tickets and let them sell them. And if they even say if the guy selling the ticket ends up buying the last few tickets and wins, he's not allowed to win. So how does that even become a just enterprise? How can it become a just law at that point? It just we need to go back to making it easy for these people to raise money. They aren't creating massive gambling halls or whatever. It's just on a part-time basis. So they need to get back to being able to do what they need to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Pete.
Well, I'm sure that you all know that I'm calling for a repeal of Act 44. His party, he said it's kind of crazy. He can't believe it happened. But you know what? Mr. Terzine, your party put that before the legislature. We had about 30 minutes to read the bill, and they rammed it down our throat. They passed it without one Democrat vote. Went to the Senate, and guess what? Your party passed it 30-20 on party lines. They implemented a bill that's absolutely going to destroy the VFWs, the American Legions, all those little groups that derive their money from small games of chance. What that bill does is squeeze them to death. I met with a gentleman from Lancaster Bingo. He provides all the small games of chance for every organization in central Pennsylvania. He's like the #1 guy. And what he had told me, the Mannheim VFW is the #1 VFW in the state. He said they're going to be out of business in February. That bill that your party, that obviously you support because it's a Mike Terzine bill, fundamentally cuts it from 70 to 30 to the local groups. The bill's bad. The bill got to be repealed, or every small organization, American Legion, VFW, the bingos at the fire departments are done. When we passed legislation for the casinos, that just ripped the heart out of most of the little communities that do bingos, these fire departments, these ambulance services. This bill added insult to injury. It is destroying these groups. What we need to do, revamp it, change it from 70-30 to 30-70. The 30% of this goes to the community, 70% goes to the organization. That makes it more palatable. It works. Look at the figures. We try to say that, but you know what? His party, it's like standing at the potato patch watching his party legislation come down on the Thunderbolt. We couldn't stop it. We didn't have the votes, and we didn't even get the bill. The 30 minutes before we passed the bill. But you know what? That's how they do things in Harrisburg. It's very autocratic. Now it's a little different. We don't have a democracy. We have an oligarchy controlled by the Republicans. The governor, who I didn't support, but I don't support all these issues. And you watch my videos, I'm fighting him on public education, I'm fighting him on housing, I'm fighting him on higher education, where all those cuts occur. This is a bad bill. We try to stop it. We are going to repeal this. I have a petition. We already have 10,000 names. 10,000 names in 1 week.
Well, there was a bill that did pass the Senate with some changes, and it's going to the House now. Do you think that bill goes far enough, or what do you think that the chances of this bill in the House?
The Senate said to us, the Republican-controlled Senate said there will be no legislation. We go lame duck. We have 1 week to pass that, send that back over. Any changes have to bring it back to us. It's not going to happen. They're taking away government from the people by saying we're not going to let us deal with this legislation.
Okay, that's going to conclude our questions, and now we'll give each of the candidates 3 minutes for closing. We'll start with Rich first.
All right, I just want to say thank you again for having us here. It's been a great spirited debate, and there are two visions here on the table. Here I have a vision for prosperity, and I have a vision where we can have a great education, a place where we can have a great economy once again, where people will start to move back to this area instead of Pete's vision of decline and destruction, and one where he wants to tax and spend people out of this state and out of this area. I think I have the better vision for the future, and his vision is about he and himself. With his $100,000 a year pension, he raised his pay by $52,000 a year since he's been there. I mean, it's always been about Pete and what he can get, and it's the per diems of $300,000 or $400,000 over the last 30 years. And I will not think a pension when elected to office. It's not going to be about me, and it's going to be about everybody and the constituents of the 49th District and about the citizens of Pennsylvania, where we can be victors of life and not victims of life. And that is not Pete's vision. He has his favorites that he definitely goes to, and he has not in the 30 years provided any improvement in the economy in this district. Even though most of our district is in Washington County, and it is the third fastest growing district in the nation for jobs, and we do not see it in our district. So we need to change some of that around, and we need new leadership, And, for 30 years, he said, well, he doesn't control the economy. But for 30 years, you had Reagan to Clinton, which was 20 years, and we had 18 good economic years. And what happened to the district? It has been in decline for 30 years, even though the economy prospered. And we have to take some of that. I mean, we've changed presidents, we've changed governors, we've changed mayors and councilmen, we've changed county commissioners. The only thing we haven't changed is Pete, and we need to change Pete to get him out and put me in so that we can start the economic rebuilding of this district and of the state.
Okay, thank you very much. Pete?
Well, my client is bringing you his campaign, which is anti-Pete. It's all about Pete, and it's all about Pete's per diems and Pete's salary and Pete's this. But you know what? He don't want you to tell you, and he doesn't want you to believe that Pete did anything well. You know what? I created a lot of jobs in Pennsylvania, a lot of jobs in this area. My opponent created one job. His job, when he's a little vendor of a hot dog stand. That's his job. He has one. He created one. Now, me in the legislature for 30 years, by the way, if you check the record, I brought in $132 million in legislative initiative grants. I'll show you. I'll show the public. We did that. The people here at this table knows the Montfait Expressway, when we met and hammered this last section, the missing link, I led the delegation. I got the votes. I got the negotiation with Brad Meyer, he's executive director of the Turnpike Commission, to take the money from Allegheny County and move it down here that the former senator had moved up to Allegheny County for the purchase of land. Now, if you don't talk about putting $550 million in a highway project is the link to this area, well, guess what? You're wrong. You're wrong. Your vision is there's no vision. I hear rhetoric. I mean, I don't even hear good rhetoric about what your idea is. You should be running for Congress because you talk about cutting the military budget. We don't have a military budget in Pennsylvania. You talk about eliminating the income tax. We don't have an income tax in Pennsylvania that you can eliminate. You talk about the 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, direct election of senators. You want better government? You want less government. You want the people in Harrisburg, your party, to pick who our senators are going to be. Guess what? That's not the way it works in Pennsylvania. And you know what? I brought in literally millions and millions of dollars. My idea, check the record, the governor's action team. I've saved 250 million jobs in Pennsylvania, because when you work in the legislature, when you raise your hand, I don't represent just the 49th district. I represent all of Fayette County. I represent all of Pennsylvania, the people of Pennsylvania. It takes more than just talking about it. It takes more than just saying, I'm going to do it and I have a vision. Well, I didn't hear the vision. Maybe I missed it. But I can show you my record of success. I can't change an economy that's climbing all over the country. I'm a state legislator. I'm not in Congress like my opponent probably wishes he was. Actually, he ran a campaign for 2 weeks when he ran for governor 2 years ago against Tom Corbett. No wonder he doesn't like the guy. He ran against him. You check the website. It's still on the website.
You have 30 seconds.
This is a local issue. I have worked very hard for my district. I've worked diligently for my district. We can show you the $5.1 billion with the Dutch Fork Lake. I can tell you about Wheeling, Pittsburgh, Sill, the Keystone Opportunity Zones. I voted bipartisan on many issues. We helped to bring the Marcellus Shale, the fracking plant in to Aliquippa because it creates jobs here. The 10,000 jobs here. And the straw that's going to really help us, the loss of Wheeling, Pittsburgh, Still. I work with the Mon Valley Partners. We got the Keystone Opportunity Economic Development Program. They're designated 2 in the state. Wheeling, Pittsburgh, Still. We're talking about right now working with the governor, working with the Secretary of Commerce, the Community Economic Development, 500 permanent jobs. 500 jobs. That's what it's all about. It's not a plan. It's an idea. Thank you very much.
Okay, once again, we want to thank the candidates, Pete Daley and Richard Massafra, for agreeing to meet with us today. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you later.